The champagne tower gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as my sister Catherine raised her glass, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "If only Sophia could be here tonight," she sobbed, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. "My twin sister died in Europe 5 years ago. A terrible accident in the Swiss Alps. I stood frozen at the entrance of the Waldorf Astoria's Grand Ballroom, my hand gripping the brass door handle so tightly my knuckles went white. The inheritance documents in my Hermes clutch suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Around me, 200 guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos dabbed at their eyes, moved by my sister's touching tribute to her dead twin. She was the adventurous one, Catherine continued, her voice breaking beautifully on cue. Always traveling, always seeking the next thrill. When the avalanche happened, she paused dramatically, letting her fiancé, James Rothschild III, pull her close. We never even recovered her body. The bitter laugh that escaped my throat caused the nearest server to turn. I quickly pressed my lips together, adjusting the emerald necklace at my throat. The same one Catherine had tried to steal from our grandmother's estate, claiming I'd died intestate. The same estate she'd been collecting for 5 years while I built my pharmaceutical empire in Switzerland, blissfully unaware that I'd been declared dead. My name is Sophia Winters, and until 6 weeks ago, I had no idea I was a ghost. The discovery had come accidentally, as most life-shattering revelations do. I'd been finalizing the sale of my biotech company, Avalon Pharmaceuticals, to a German conglomerate for $847 million when my lawyer in Zurich called with an unusual problem. "There seems to be an issue with your identity verification," he'd said, confusion evident in his voice. "According to U.S. records, you died in 2019. The investigation that followed revealed a carefully orchestrated fraud that would have impressed me if it hadn't enraged me. Catherine had filed a death certificate in Colorado, complete with forged witness statements and a fabricated police report about a skiing accident. She'd waited exactly long enough to seem appropriately grief-stricken, then claimed my half of our inheritance. $50 million in trust funds, properties, and investments our parents had left us. But Catherine had made one crucial mistake. She'd never actually been to Switzerland. The avalanche she described had happened in Austria. The resort she named had closed in 2018. And the death certificate she'd filed contained a forged signature from a Swiss official who'd retired 3 years before my supposed death. Now, standing in that ballroom, watching her perform her grief for New York's elite, I felt the kind of cold fury that comes from realizing someone you shared a womb with had murdered you on paper for money. Catherine was always the responsible one, James's mother, Victoria Rothschild, was saying to a group of guests near the entrance. Taking care of her sister's affairs after the tragedy, managing both estates. Such strength. I almost laughed again. Managing both estates. Is that what they called theft now? The band had shifted to a waltz, and couples were moving onto the dance floor. Catherine, restored to composure, was greeting guests at the main table, accepting condolences about her long-dead sister with practiced grace. She wore a Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people's cars, paid for, no doubt, with my money. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to my lawyer who was waiting in the hotel bar. 5 minutes. Then I began walking through the crowd. The first person to recognize me was my college roommate, Melissa Chen. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound caused a ripple of turned heads, but I kept walking, my heels clicking against the floor in rhythm with my thundering heartbeat. "Yes, Sophia." Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. I placed a finger to my lips and continued toward the main table. The second person was my mother's best friend, Diana Torres. She grabbed her husband's arm so hard he winced. "That's not possible," she breathed. By the time I was halfway across the ballroom, a wave of whispers followed in my wake. Phones appeared in hands. The band's music faltered as the musicians noticed the growing disturbance. Catherine was laughing at something James had said, her hand on his shoulder, when the crowd parted before me like the Red Sea. She looked up, mild annoyance crossing her features at the interruption. Our eyes met. The color drained from her face so completely that her foundation looked like a mask against her neck. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The champagne glass in her hand began to tremble. "Hello, Katie," I said, using the childhood nickname she'd always hated. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic from the afterlife was murder." The ballroom had gone completely silent except for the distant clink of silverware from the kitchen. James looked between us, confusion evident on his patrician features. "Catherine, who is this?" "I'm Sophia Winters," I said, extending my hand with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The dead sister. Though as you can see, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." Catherine found her voice, though it came out as a croak. This isn't possible. You died. There was a death certificate. The Swiss authorities are actually quite interested in that forged death certificate," I interrupted. pulling the documents from my clutch. As are the FBI, the IRS, and the Colorado State Police. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, and filing false documents. It's quite an impressive list of felonies, Katie. James stepped back from Catherine as if she were contagious. Catherine, what is she talking about? Oh, she didn't tell you? I turned to address the room, my voice carrying clearly. My sister filed a death certificate for me 5 years ago while I was living in Switzerland, building my pharmaceutical company. She claimed my inheritance, sold my properties, and liquidated my accounts. $50 million, all based on a lie. You abandoned us. Catherine suddenly shrieked, her composure finally cracking. You left for Europe and never came back. No calls, no visits. I called every month, I said calmly. You told me everyone was too busy. I invited you to visit. You said Switzerland was too cold. I sent Christmas cards. You claimed they never arrived. I paused, letting the words sink in. But you cashed every check from my trust fund that was still being auto-deposited into our joint account from college, didn't you? Victoria Rothschild had risen from her chair, her face a mask of horror. James, get away from her. The wedding is off. The wedding is definitely off, I agreed. It's hard to have a wedding when the bride is in federal custody. As if on cue, my lawyer entered with 2 FBI agents in dark suits. The guests gasped collectively, phones now openly recording the scene. Catherine Winters, the lead agent said, producing handcuffs. You're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. Catherine's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair, the designer gown pooling around her like spilled milk. Sophia, please, she whispered. We're sisters. We're twins. I crouched down to her level, studying the face that was a mirror of my own yet belonged to a stranger. We were twins, I corrected. But you killed me, remember? 5 years ago in an avalanche that never happened at a resort that didn't exist. I was desperate, she sobbed, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. My business failed. I had debts. I knew you were successful in Europe. I thought you'd never find out. You thought wrong. I stood, smoothing my dress. Enjoy the cell, Katie. I hear they're much smaller than the Manhattan penthouse you bought with my money. The agents hauled her to her feet. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she mouthed. So am I replied. I'm sorry I ever trusted you. The ballroom erupted in chaos as she was escorted out. Guests were talking over each other, phones were ringing, and someone was crying hysterically. James's mother, I realized. James himself stood frozen, his engagement ring box still in his pocket. The perfect proposal he'd planned, now a nightmare he'd never forget. I walked back through the crowd, which parted respectfully this time. At the entrance, I turned back to address the room one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting your evening. But when you're declared dead by your own twin sister, resurrection requires a certain amount of drama. I smiled coldly. Enjoy the rest of the party. Everything's already paid for, with my money, of course. Outside, the Manhattan night was crisp and clear. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the city air, feeling alive in a way I hadn't in years. My phone buzzed with messages, reporters, friends who'd seen the social media posts already going viral, business associates expressing shock. I ignored them all and hailed a taxi. JFK Airport, please, I told the driver. Where you headed? He asked, pulling into traffic. Switzerland, I replied, settling back into the seat. I have a company to run and a life to live. My real life, not the grave my sister put me in. As we drove away, I saw the flashing lights of police cars reflected in the Waldorf's windows. By tomorrow, the story would be everywhere. The dead twin who crashed her sister's engagement party. The resurrection that ended with handcuffs. Catherine would probably serve 5 to 10 years. The money would be returned, though most of it was already spent. The properties would be recovered. Justice would be served. But sitting in that taxi, watching Manhattan blur past, I realized the real justice wasn't in the arrest or the money. It was in the simple act of walking into that ballroom alive, proving that some bonds can't be broken by death, even a fabricated one, and that the truth, like the dead, always finds a way to rise. My phone rang, an unknown number with a Swiss country code. I answered, Ms. Winters, a familiar voice, my CFO in Zurich. The Germans have agreed to your terms. 850 million, not 847. Congratulations. I smiled, a real smile this time. Thank you, Marcus. I'll be back tomorrow. We have a company to sell and a future to build. Welcome back from the dead, ma'am, he said with a chuckle. Thank you, I replied, watching the city lights fade into the distance. It's good to be alive.